Welcome, board game soloists, to Top 5 Solo Games. I'm horror writer and board game addict J. Allen Riker. You can call me Jeff. And these are my top 5 boss battling games. Despite having only been around since 2015, at least according to Board Game Geek, boss battlers have become super popular, making companies huge profits as people are willing to shell out tons of bucks for tons of minis. But as you'll see on my list, not all boss battlers have minis. So, as I said, the theme of boss battle is something that you can look at in Board Game Geek, and it says that it began in 2015 with Kingdom Death Monster. So, not included on this list, Kingdom Death Monster. Kind of for maybe a few reasons. One, and the most important, it won't fit on my table. And I'm just trying to not have that fight. 2, I can't afford it. It is an incredibly expensive game, and I know that it is sort of a lifestyle game for people who get really into it, and that can save you money as you spend less money on other games. 3, it does have sprues. You can see them right here. But honestly, if it weren't for the other two, with the reputation that Kingdom Death Monster has, I would probably give it a try. So let's get on to the number 5 boss battler, Dark Souls. So this is definitely included in the theme of boss battler by Board Game Geek and by a lot of people. I will tell you, when I play it, it seems like you're going through quite a bit of dungeon, facing off against minions before you ever get to a boss. There are a lot of dungeon crawling games that have a big boss at the end that we don't consider boss battlers. So what is the difference here? I think that the mini bosses and the bosses are definitely the stars of this game, but is it a hard line? I don't think so. I think that you could just make the argument that it's not a pure boss battler any more than any other dungeon crawler that at the end of the dungeon you face a big boss. So since Kingdom Death Monster, many of these miniature-based boss battlers have felt the need to, in between boss battles, have something else. With Kingdom Death Monster, it's the settlement phase. With Oathsworn, it's the narrative sort of settlement phase. With Dark Souls, I think that that's what the dungeon provides. I think it lets you build up resources to get to what many people consider to be the real meat of the game. But honestly, I wouldn't play it as a boss rush. If it didn't have the dungeons in between where you face off against the minions, I don't know that I would play it. But I do think that Dark Souls is a fun game. It has some really nice minis. It has a fun flow. You gain lots of loot and build up in a satisfying way in order to finally fight the mini boss, which gives you better loot, and you can continue battling your way to the big boss. I think that it gained a really bad reputation when it came out because Steamforged Games tends to put out half-baked games, and this was a very early one. But they have taken a lot of things from the community. They have revised the game, and they're putting out new sets in which you can use your own your old material, although sometimes you'll have to shoehorn it in, though it seems like they're on their way to integrating all of it. And I think it's a very underrated game that if you can get it for a bargain and you're looking for a fun boss battler, it's a good one. Especially if you like the video game and you know who everybody is. It's really fun seeing representation both in the miniature and in how they attack through their little deck of cards. That brings us to our number 4 boss battler, Bullet. So there are several different bullets. The 2 main sets are Bullet Heart, as pictured here, and Bullet Star. And then there are expansions that give you 4 heroes. There's one called Orange out right now, and there's a Kickstarter actually running right now. It's crowdsourced in some way. I don't remember if it's Kickstarter or GameFound, with 2 more sets. This game is so good, and I did not think it would be as good as it was, even after hearing people talk about it. And I wouldn't have even given it a shot if it was based on just how it looks and on the bullet mechanism where they drop down the board as they get shot of you. It's said to simulate a bullet hell game. I think it simulates more of some sort of phone game, but it is so much fun. And I think that the wildest thing about it is that I wouldn't want to play it multiplayer. Multiplayer, it's timed, and I think that the player powers that you get can be very varied when you're using them, but I don't think that they would feel, but that's for eliminating bullets on your own board. In multiplayer, you then send those bullets to other people, but it doesn't matter how they got eliminated to them. So you have variety with your own character, but then you don't have a variety. It's how it seems. I've never played a multiplayer on the enemy side. Whereas when you play this in the solo mode as a boss battler, each of these heroes has a stack of cards to make a boss AI, and they act very differently. They do extremely different things, which you wouldn't think was possible with just a grid of bullets, a grid of these tokens. But they feel so different, and it is such a puzzle to figure out each boss. And it does one thing that I really love, that goes beyond modularity, to where they gave you each character as both a playable character and an enemy. I love that in Imperium with the empires. I love that in Marvel Zombies, where you can play zombie mode and hero mode. It really makes you feel like you're getting the most out of it. It feels very generous to me, and it adds this modularity that I think is the highest level, and it creates the highest level of replayability in my mind. I will play bullet and I will lose, and there are not many games where I will play it 10 times in a row trying to beat the same boss with the same poorly matched player character. But with bullet, I have a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are my definition of fun, and I want to be able to cross it off as a win, not just a loss. And I have sat there for hours doing so. Now maybe that doesn't sound fun to you. You can skip those pairings because everything here is so varied that there's simply no way that every character is going to be balanced against every villain. I think part of the fun is figuring that out. I highly recommend, as a very affordable way to play a boss battler, Bullet Heart and Bullet Star, my number 4 boss battler. Now, my number 3 boss battler is definitely more on the traditional course of games that probably took a good amount of influence from Kingdom Death Monster, where you get some really big minis and try to bash them up with some comparably weaker heroes. And that game is Oathsworn, Into the Deepwood. Now, I almost said weak heroes, which my understanding from Kingdom Death Monster is that they are pretty weak and you can expect them to die a lot. Oathsworn, okay, yeah, you can expect a fair amount of death. Your characters get knocked out and they come back injured, and there's some ways to mitigate the bad effects that come from that. So it's a tough game, but the heroes also feel very powerful, and the game is just wonderfully balanced where the monsters feel like monsters, but you kind of feel like you're leading a group of 4 mini monsters. The bosses are varied. They have different sizes. Sometimes there are 3, 4 creatures that you're facing off against. Sometimes you're facing off against one huge monster. There are scenarios that involve giant monsters, but they have minions. They might have corrupt villagers. There are good villagers who you're trying to save, or who, if you're getting in trouble, you can leave out because they are just as likely to draw an attack as one of your characters. Oh, brutal. I don't want to spoil the bosses for you by describing them, but each one of them is definitely its own puzzle. I haven't come close to fully exploring this game, especially because the characters feel so different that, to me, figuring out how to face off against each boss is going to be a different puzzle depending on what your team is, especially if you aren't purposefully balancing the teams to always include certain types of characters. This game gets a reputation because of its strong narrative as being something that maybe you're going to play through once or maybe twice to see how they branch. I don't play the stories at all. I play the short versions, which is a brilliant move on their part to not make me play through the narrative if I don't want to, and instead I just see what sort of benefits and drawbacks I have from that chapter of the story. And yet I feel that the game is super compelling. So when you've gone through it and it's worn itself out for you, that doesn't mean that this game isn't still offering a lot of fantastic material. You get 21 bosses, you get a whole passel of, I'm from the country, you get a whole passel of heroes, and the gameplay is so good that solving that puzzle with slightly different resources every time is going to be no different than, say, facing a boss in my number 2 boss battler, Eon's End. Now that was a nice transition until I called attention to the transition. So, Eon's End was just in my video of top 5 deck building games. I don't want to go over everything about it. In these videos, I try to talk mostly about the aspect of what the list is about. So in this case, let's talk about those bosses. Great art. I think that even from the beginning, their art on the bosses was top notch. The humans, they look kind of smooth and kind of a little bit weird to me. I don't dislike the mage art, but I love the Nemesis art. The bosses feel giant. Just look at the image right there. Like, this boss is barely big enough to notice you. They're weird. They're huge. They're beyond our understanding. They have different abilities that interrupt your plans and make you feel miserable, like miserable little gnats, as you are trying to desperately prevent Gravehold from being destroyed, prevent minions from destroying you, while also trying to have enough resources left to build yourself up to the point where you're strong enough to face off against this boss. And that's one thing that's different about this game than any other game on this list, is that you are not fit to face the boss at the beginning, because as a deck builder, you're little and frail and weak. But by the end, and when you decide to go on your aggro rush and start ignoring all the damage that the monster is dealing towards Gravehold and all the bad effects, which are the timer is counting down on, and you just go all out, like, by that point, you are a match for this godlike creature, and it just feels amazing. The ramp up in Eon's End is, as I've said, second to none other than Eric Lang games. It belongs directly beside Zombicide or Cthulhu Death May Die in that regard. And one thing about Eon's End is that when you want to fight a boss and you don't want to run through a narrative story and you don't want to run through a dungeon, or you don't want to do a long settlement phase, you can play Eon's End and all you are doing is boss battling. I guess it may not consider, the creators might not even have considered Kingdom Death Monster. It's such a different sort of game. I feel like the games that center around big minis probably all draw a heritage line to Kingdom Death Monster, but Eon's End, I don't know. They did not feel the need to add in an extra phase. Now, there are the legacy games, the games where it's got this narrative in between and they tell you who fights who, and maybe you put stickers on cards, or maybe you just add some cards in to make yourself tougher at the same time that you're adding cards in to make the bosses tougher. So I don't understand that. But that is not how I play. I pull out a boss, I pull out a mage, I randomize the spells and resources, and I go. I just battle a big baddie, and it's a lot of fun. That is my favorite deck building game, and my second favorite boss battling game, Eon's End. So that brings us to my number one boss battling game. I would say that this game, maybe it's unexpected in the genre. Maybe you don't think of it like this because it's not a mini-based game, but it's certainly not an unexpected game to be at the top of somebody's list. There are many people who play this game exclusively or almost exclusively. It's a big lifestyle game. It can absorb all of your gaming dollars. And that is my number one pick, Marvel Champions, the card game. So this is a living card game from Fantasy Flight. What sets it apart from the other Fantasy Flight living card games like Lord of the Rings or Arkham Horror is that the scenarios are almost entirely just villains. They are comic book villains. Sometimes there's a name. There's often a name that goes along with it that describes the sort of heist that they're pulling off or the sort of trouble that they're getting up to. But for the most part, you're just facing off against Rhino or Ultron or Red Skull or Ronan. And that doesn't seem like a big thing, but first of all, it gets the game included here. And let me point out that while it might seem weird to include it, that it is actually in the official list from Board Game Geek of this category of game. So, you know better than Board Game Geek. I don't know, maybe you do. Anyway, besides the fact that it, you can include it as a boss battler, what I love about Marvel Champions that kept me from getting into Arkham Horror is how replayable the game is, because these are villains. You don't play through a chapter and then move on to see what the next chapter is. If you buy a new hero pack and you want to see how that hero does against all of the villains that you already own, you will play them over and over again, and not like from beginning to end. And I think that there's a limited number of times that a person is going to do that because they feel like they're experiencing a story, and maybe they're experiencing it in different ways, but still. This is facing off against a boss, which for me, when the hero is changing, makes it a totally different experience and something that you actually want to see what the differences are. I don't feel like the investigators have that sort of feel. First, because I don't think that they're as differentiated. I don't think that they're intended to be, so it's not a slight against the game. It's a similar, very similar game, but it's also got some big differences, and I feel like that's one of them. But also, while you might know the monsters in Lovecraft's mythos, it's probably not the case that you actually know the names of any of the investigators. By having such familiarity through the Marvel universe both for fans of the comics and fans of the movies, it does a lot of work to fill in the gaps of why you want to see how these villains and heroes face off against each other. Also, though I know that there are small campaigns contained within each one of the big box expansions, and if someone wanted a narrative-focused living card game, I would encourage them to try Marvel Champions and just play the loosely fitted together story, because the card play in Marvel Champions is so good. But for me, as someone who doesn't like to be told in what order to do things, where I buy a hero and I want to see what they do against all my villains, or I find a tough new villain and I just want to face off against it with, a dozen heroes in a row, I can do that because I can just pull it out and play it as a one-off. And then I can switch some stuff around and play it again immediately without playing out this prescribed story. And personally, I really appreciate that. It also means that while a lot of people do treat this as a lifestyle game, you don't have to buy everything. You're not going to miss a part of the story. You can buy the heroes that you like. And if you're into the deck construction part of it, then it's probably going to compel you to buy some heroes that maybe you aren't interested in because it's got some cards that you can't get elsewhere. But if you're like me and you don't pay that much attention, then you don't even know what cards you're missing out on. And I'm not a big deck construction guy, so I play the pre-constructed decks, or I play some general purpose, like I have a general purpose aggression deck, a couple of general purpose justice decks. These are different aspects of heroism that you can play with each and hot swap them into each hero, which again adds massive amounts of replayability. That brings us to the cost. People talk about how much it costs to play these living card games, but it doesn't have to cost that much to play Marvel Champions because you are not playing through a definite story. You can pick and choose what you want to get. But also, think about this. At this point, when I buy a $14 hero or a $10 hero, which is usually the cost at Miniature Market or Game Nerds when they go on sale, I get 30 unique plays by taking that hero and facing them off against each one of the villains. Every time you buy something, it exponentially increases the value that you get from each part that you buy. That, I think, is an amazing value. It does have an upfront investment. I am very, very cost sensitive, so I understand that. But as you build your collection, first of all, don't get it all at once. And second, instead of adding a new game, instead of constantly having to learn new games, I think it's better to get in and get really deep into games. I like both. I like learning. You have to learn what your favorite games are, but once you know what a favorite game is, I think it's a very wise use of money to flesh it out, especially when you get so much added value like you do in this game. So Marvel Champions has fought its way to the top of solo games lists. If you look at the BGG top 200, it's battling it out for the top spot now every single year. It raced up there because it's just a really good game. And I think unlike Marvel Zombies, each component is very different so that you don't have to be as much of a fan to fill in the gaps to make it feel like you're playing a new character. Like when you're playing Doctor Strange or Captain America, they're two totally different experiences. And that is why Marvel Champions is my number one boss battler. So what are your favorite boss battlers? Do you only consider it to be a boss battler if it's got a big mini and you're fighting it out skirmish style? I don't blame you. I've got several of those coming to me, hopefully next year. Primal the Awakening, the second Monster Hunter, Iceborne, and Kingdoms Forlorn will not be coming next year, but hopefully in the next 3 years or so. But it probably won't fit on my table anyway. Maybe I'll have a bigger table by then. Do you think that Kingdom Death Monster is a good game to say it's the first boss battler? If not, what game do you think could qualify as a boss battler that predates it? I'd be really interested to know. Leave anything like that in the comments. And as always, have a great day and keep playing solo.